The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Tabitha Lockhart clutched her journal to her chest, running through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1873. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the sound of angry footsteps closed in behind her. She had committed no crime, nothing except reading her poetry aloud at the town's cultural society meeting, words that questioned the place of women in their frontier society. "Get that filthy-mouthed girl." Sheriff Bolton's voice boomed behind her, the same man who minutes before had yanked her from the small wooden stage of the meeting hall, declaring her words dangerous to the moral fabric of decent society. Tabitha ducked into an alley, her honey-brown hair falling from its careful arrangement as she desperately sought escape. She had come west with such hope to teach, to write, to find her voice in the expanding frontier. At 22, she'd believed the West offered freedom from the strict confines of her Boston upbringing. Now she found herself running for simply speaking her mind. The rough hands that caught her belonged to two of Bolton's deputies. They dragged her toward the edge of town, to a secluded spot behind the livery where the sheriff waited, tapping his baton against his palm. "Time to teach you some respect for proper womanly behavior," Bolton sneered as the first blow fell across her shoulders. Tabitha refused to scream. Each strike of the baton brought tears to her eyes, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. When they finally left her crumpled in the dirt, her journal pages scattered around her like broken wings, she tasted blood on her lips and felt the sting of betrayal more sharply than her physical wounds. Night had fallen when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. Tabitha tried to gather her torn pages, attempting to rise despite the pain radiating through her body. She expected more torment, perhaps Bolton returning to ensure his message had been received. Instead, a tall figure dismounted from a magnificent buckskin horse. In the moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a man in a dusty hat, broad shoulders, and the glint of what might have been a badge on his chest. "Madam," his voice was deep but gentle. "Dear God, what happened to you?" Tabitha flinched away as he knelt beside her. "Please. Just leave me be." "I can't do that." He carefully gathered the scattered papers, his movements deliberate as if handling precious artifacts. His eyes scanned a few lines on one page, and in the silver moonlight, Tabitha saw something unexpected in his expression, not disgust or judgment, but wonder. "These words," he said softly, helping her to stand, "they're like a song I've been waiting to hear." Zachary Granger had ridden into Copper Creek with one purpose: to bring justice to a territory that had forgotten the meaning of the word. As the newly appointed U.S. Marshal for the Arizona Territory, he'd heard troubling reports about Sheriff Bolton's reign in the small mining town. But finding a beaten woman and her scattered poetry wasn't how he'd planned to begin his investigation. "I'm Marshal Zachary Granger," he said, supporting her weight as she struggled to stand. "And I believe you and I have a lot to discuss about Sheriff Bolton." "Tabitha Lockhart," she whispered, her voice raw from holding back her cries, "and there's nothing to discuss. This is how things are here for women who speak out of turn." Zach's jaw tightened as he carefully lifted her onto his horse. "Not anymore, Miss Lockhart, not anymore." As they rode slowly toward the small hotel at the edge of town, Tabitha clutching her salvaged papers, she realized that for the first time since arriving in Copper Creek, she'd met someone who might actually listen to what she had to say. The small hotel room was sparse but clean. Zach had arranged for the proprietor's wife, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Oates, to help tend to Tabitha's wounds. The woman clucked sympathetically as she applied witch hazel to the bruises and cuts. "Been waiting for someone to stand up to that brute Bolton," Mrs. Oates whispered. "Just didn't expect it to be such a delicate thing as yourself." Tabitha winced as the cloth touched a particularly tender spot on her back. "I wasn't trying to stand up to anyone, I was just reading my poetry." "Words have power, dear," Mrs. Oates said sagely, "especially the true ones. That's why men like Bolton fear them." After Mrs. Oates left, Zach returned with a tray of food and a pot of tea. He set it on the small table by the window and pulled up a chair, keeping a respectful distance. "You should eat something," he said, his voice still holding that gentle tone that seemed at odds with his imposing figure. Tabitha managed to sit up, pulling her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why are you helping me, Marshal? You don't know me." Zach poured tea into a chipped cup and handed it to her. "I know enough. I know you were attacked for exercising your right to free expression. That's not justice, that's tyranny." "Is that why you're in Copper Creek, to fight tyranny?" A hint of bitterness crept into her voice. "I'm here because 3 women have disappeared from this region in the past year, and Sheriff Bolton's investigations have been suspiciously inadequate." Zach's green eyes narrowed. "But now I'm wondering if there's more to the story." Tabitha's hand trembled slightly, sloshing tea onto the blanket. "Disappeared. Young women, all of them newcomers to the area. All of them educated, independent types who'd come west to teach or work, the kind who might write poetry." His gaze fell on her journal, now carefully stacked on the nightstand. "You think there's a connection to what happened to me? I don't know yet, but I'd like to read your poetry if you're willing, the pieces that got you beaten." He held up a hand when she stiffened. "Not to judge, Miss Lockhart, to understand." Tabitha studied him, searching for any sign of mockery or deceit. Finding none, she slowly reached for her journal and handed it to him. "Page 37, she said quietly. "That's what I was reading when Bolton dragged me away." Zach turned to the page and began to read silently. His expression changed as his eyes moved across her neat handwriting, first surprise, then admiration, and finally a kind of quiet anger. "The silent graves of women's dreams lie scattered across the plain," he read aloud, his voice giving her words a resonance she hadn't heard before. "Each wouldn't cross a monument to freedom sought in vain." He looked up at her, something new in his gaze. "This isn't just poetry, Miss Lockhart. These are observations. You've been noticing things. I'm a teacher, Marshal Granger. Observation is part of my profession." She took a shaky breath. "Those lines were inspired by conversations with local women, stories they shared about others who came before me. Women who arrived with hopes and dreams, only to vanish or suddenly leave without explanation." Zach closed the journal carefully. "I think your beating wasn't just about silencing inappropriate female speech. I think Bolton was afraid of what you might discover or what you already have." Tabitha felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. "What do we do now? First, you rest and recover. Tomorrow, I start asking questions, official ones, with the weight of federal authority behind them." He stood, placing her journal back on the nightstand. "And if you're willing, I'd like to hear more of your observations. Your words might be more valuable than either of us realized." As he turned to leave, Tabitha called out, "Marshal Granger, thank you for believing me, for listening." He paused at the door, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. "Your words are like a song I've been waiting to hear, Miss Lockhart. Clear, true, and brave. Rest well." After he left, Tabitha stared at the closed door, wondering what sort of man quotes poetry to a battered woman in a backwater town. Despite the pain pulsing through her body, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Dawn broke over Copper Creek with golden fingers of light stretching across the rugged landscape. Tabitha woke to the sound of raised voices in the street below her window. Moving carefully to avoid aggravating her injuries, she pulled aside the thin curtain to see Marshal Granger facing Sheriff Bolton and 3 deputies in front of the hotel. "This is federal jurisdiction now, Bolton," Zach's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Those women disappeared on your watch, and I'm here to find out why." Bolton's face flushed red beneath his unkempt beard. "You got no right coming here throwing accusations. We investigated those disappearances proper-like." "Your investigation consisted of declaring they must have moved on to California." Zach's stance was relaxed but alert, his hand nowhere near his holster, yet somehow making its presence known. "No search parties, no telegrams to neighboring towns, no questions about their last known whereabouts." "Women come and go in mining towns," Bolton spat. "Not my fault if they can't handle frontier life. And I suppose Miss Lockhart couldn't handle frontier life either. Is that why your men beat her for reciting poetry?" Zach's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Bolton's eyes darted up toward the hotel windows, and Tabitha instinctively stepped back from view. That Boston girl was stirring up trouble, putting ideas in people's heads. Ideas like women deserving equal treatment under the law. Zach stepped closer to Bolton. Or ideas about why so many female newcomers seemed to vanish from Copper Creek. A small crowd had gathered, townspeople watching the confrontation with expressions ranging from fear to grim satisfaction. Tabitha noticed several women hovering at the edges, exchanging glances. "You're overstepping, Marshal," Bolton growled. "This is my town." "This is United States territory," Zach corrected him. "And I've got papers from the federal court authorizing a full investigation into the disappearances of Emily Whitman, Sarah Coleman, and Rebecca James." He pulled an official-looking document from his vest, starting with a review of all your records. Bolton's hand twitched toward his gun and the crowd tensed, but after a moment he spat on the ground near Zach's boots. Town Hall. 1 hour. "But you won't find nothing because there's nothing to find." He turned to leave, then paused. "And that Lockhart woman, she'd best watch herself. Marshal or no marshal, accidents happen in mining towns." "Threaten her again," Zach said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "and you'll be on the first prison wagon to Yuma." As Bolton and his men stalked away, Tabitha saw Zach look up toward her window. Their eyes met briefly before she stepped fully into view, acknowledging his defense with a small nod. His expression softened for just a moment before he turned to address the lingering townspeople. Tabitha dressed carefully, her body still aching from the beating. She had just finished pinning her hair when a soft knock came at her door. "Miss Lockhart, it's Mrs. Oates. I've brought you some breakfast and a visitor." Opening the door revealed the innkeeper's wife carrying a tray, accompanied by a young woman Tabitha recognized from the Cultural Society meeting the seamstress's assistant who had smiled encouragingly during her poetry reading. "This is Violet Cooper," Mrs. Oates explained. "She was hoping for a word with you." Violet twisted her hands nervously in her apron. "I saw what they did to you, Miss Lockhart. It wasn't right." Tabitha invited them in, accepting the tray with murmured thanks. "Please sit down, Miss Cooper." Once Mrs. Oates had left, closing the door behind her, Violet leaned forward urgently. "Your poem about the graves of women's dreams, it's about them, isn't it? The ones who disappeared." Tabitha set down her teacup carefully. "You knew them. I knew Emily Whitman best. She came to teach at the school last year." Violet's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was asking questions, too, about the mine and the working conditions. Then she started looking into land deeds and ownership papers. And then she vanished," Tabitha guessed. Violet nodded. "Sheriff said she must have moved on, but her things were still in her room at the boarding house. And there was a letter." She stopped, glancing nervously at the window. "What letter, Violet?" "A letter she'd written to the territorial governor about irregularities in the mine ownership. I found it when I was helping clear her room. I kept it hidden." Her eyes were wide with fear. "If Bolton knew I had it." "Does Marshal Granger know about this letter?" "No, I was too afraid to come forward until I saw him stand up to Bolton this morning." Violet reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "Take it. Maybe it will help him find out what happened to Emily and the others." Tabitha accepted the letter, feeling its weight as more than just paper. "Thank you for your courage, Violet." "Your words yesterday gave me courage, Miss Lockhart. The way you spoke about women finding their voice in this new land, it reminded me of Emily." Violet stood to leave. "Be careful. Bolton has friends in high places." After Violet left, Tabitha unfolded the letter. Emily Whitman's handwriting was neat and precise, detailing her suspicions that the Silver Eagle Mine, Copper Creek's economic lifeblood, was operating on falsified land claims that rightfully belonged to the nearby Apache tribe. More disturbingly, she had discovered evidence that the mine's owner, Judge Harold Blackstone, had conspired with Bolton to forge documents and intimidate witnesses. The letter was dated just 3 days before Emily's disappearance. Tabitha had just refolded the letter when another knock came at her door. This time it was Zach, his expression grim. "Miss Lockhart, I need to move you to a safer location. Bolton's men have been watching the hotel, and I don't trust them to respect the law." "I was just coming to find you," she said, handing him Emily's letter. "I think I know why those women disappeared." Zach read the letter quickly, his jaw tightening. "This confirms my suspicions about Blackstone. He's been buying up politicians all over the territory." He looked up at her. Where did you get this? A friend of Emily Whitman's kept it hidden. She brought it to me because of my poetry because she thought I was investigating the same matters. Were you? Tabitha shook her head, not consciously. But I've been collecting stories from local women since I arrived, writing about their experiences. Perhaps I was piecing it together without realizing. Zach carefully tucked the letter into his inside pocket. This is evidence of corruption and possible murder. It makes you an even bigger target. He glanced around the small room. Can you ride? Yes, I grew up riding in Massachusetts. Good. Pack whatever you can carry easily. I'm taking you to stay with friends outside town, a ranch about 10 miles south. You'll be safer there while I continue the investigation. I'm not running away, Marshal Granger. Tabitha stood as tall as her injuries would allow. Those women deserve justice, and my words helped bring their story to light. I won't hide while you face the danger alone. Zach studied her face, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I'm not asking you to hide, Miss Lockhart. I'm asking you to stay alive to tell their story, and mine if things go poorly. The intensity in his gaze made Tabitha's breath catch. You expect trouble. Blackstone controls the mine, the bank, and apparently the sheriff. Men like that don't surrender power willingly. He moved to the window, checking the street below. The ranch belongs to my old army friend Daniel Morgan and his wife. They're good people, and their land sits on Apache territory borders. Bolton's men won't follow us there. Tabitha hesitated only briefly before gathering her journal and the few belongings she'd brought to Copper Creek. Very well, Marshal, but promise me you'll keep me informed of your investigation. I'll do better than that, Zach said, helping her with her small bag. I'll consult with you. Your observations about this town and its people might reveal patterns I would miss. They left through the hotel's back entrance, where Zach had 2 horses waiting his buckskin and a gentle, dappled mare. Despite her injuries, Tabitha mounted with determination, adjusting her skirts as best she could for riding astride. As they rode out of town, taking a roundabout path to avoid being seen, Zach glanced over at her. Your poem about the graves of women's dreams, it was beautiful, haunting. Tabitha felt a flush that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Poetry helps me make sense of the world, find patterns in chaos. We could use some of that pattern finding now. He guided his horse closer to hers as the trail narrowed. I've been tracking missing women across 3 territories for 2 years. Something bigger is happening, and Copper Creek is just one piece of it. You think Emily and the others are part of a larger conspiracy? I do. And I think your words might have accidentally touched on truths powerful men want kept silent. He looked at her with new respect. Sometimes a poet sees what a lawman misses. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rugged beauty of the Arizona landscape stretching around them. Despite the circumstances, Tabitha felt an unexpected sense of freedom riding beside this unusual marshal who valued her words. Tell me more about yourself, Miss Lockhart, Zach said as they forded a shallow stream. What brought you to Arizona territory? The same thing that brings many women west: opportunity and escape. She guided her mare carefully over the slippery rocks. My father died last year, leaving considerable debts. My mother returned to her family in England, but I chose to make my own way. As a teacher, yes. The advertisement for Copper Creek School promised a progressive community welcoming to educated women. That proved somewhat exaggerated. Her lips curved in a wry smile. And the poetry, was that always your passion, since childhood? My father was a literature professor before financial troubles drove him to drink. She looked away, watching a hawk circle overhead. He taught me to love words, to find power in them even when we had nothing else. Zach nodded thoughtfully. My mother loved poetry too. She would recite Wordsworth and Keats while tending our small farm in Pennsylvania. After she died, my father couldn't bear to hear poetry anymore. Is that why you became a lawman instead of a scholar? Tabitha asked, recognizing the educated cadence in his speech that seemed at odds with his frontier appearance. Partly. The war came, and afterwards, there seemed to be so much injustice that needed addressing. He pointed toward a plume of smoke visible in the distance. That's the Morgan Ranch. We'll be there by midday. As they rode, Tabitha found herself studying Zach's profile against the bright sky, the strong jaw, the watchful eyes that missed nothing, the way he sat his horse with easy confidence. He was unlike any lawman she'd encountered before, this marshal who quoted poetry and listened to a woman's words as if they mattered. For the first time since her father's death, Tabitha felt understood, and for the first time since arriving in Copper Creek, she felt safe. The Morgan Ranch sprawled across a fertile valley nestled between rocky hills. A modest but well-maintained ranch house stood surrounded by outbuildings and corrals, with cattle grazing on the distant slopes. As they approached, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. "Zach Granger, as I live and breathe. When I got your telegram, I could hardly believe it." Daniel Morgan strode forward to clasp Zach's hand as they dismounted. "Daniel, good to see you." Zach turned to help Tabitha down, his hands gentle at her waist as he mindfully avoided her bruises. "This is Miss Tabitha Lockhart. She needs safe harbor for a few days." Daniel's friendly expression darkened as he noticed Tabitha's bruised face. "Bolton's work." "His deputies on his orders," Zach confirmed grimly. "Then you're doubly welcome here, Miss Lockhart." Daniel bowed slightly. "Any enemy of that corrupt badge-wearer is a friend of the Morgans." A woman appeared in the doorway of the ranch house, wiping her hands on an apron. "Don't keep them standing in the yard, Daniel. Bring our guests inside." Hannah Morgan proved to be as warm as her husband, exclaiming in sympathy over Tabitha's injuries and immediately setting about making her comfortable in a bright, airy guest room. After helping Tabitha freshen up, she insisted on serving a hearty lunch while Zach and Daniel discussed the situation. "Bolton's been terrorizing this region for years," Daniel explained, passing a plate of biscuits. "Judge Blackstone brought him in when the silver strike first hit, supposedly to maintain order. Instead, he's been enforcing Blackstone's private version of the law. The territorial governor has received complaints," Zach noted, "but Blackstone's political connections have protected Bolton until now." "What's changed?" Hannah asked, pouring coffee for everyone. Zach glanced at Tabitha. "Evidence has surfaced connecting Bolton and Blackstone to land fraud and possibly the disappearance of 3 women. Daniel leaned forward. "The school teachers. I knew something wasn't right about that. Good women don't just abandon their posts without a word." One of them, Emily Whitman, discovered that Blackstone's mining claims overlap with Apache treaty lands, Tabitha explained. "She wrote to the governor about it before she disappeared." Hannah shook her head sadly. "That poor girl. She came to a quilting circle here once." "Bright, dedicated young woman. The Apache have been complaining about incursions onto their territory for months," Daniel added. "Chief Nahalze has kept the peace so far, but his patience is wearing thin." Zach's expression grew thoughtful. "Have you had any contact with Nahalze recently?" "He trades with us occasionally. His people respect our boundaries because we respect theirs." Daniel studied Zach's face. "You're thinking of bringing him into this. If Blackstone is stealing Apache land for his mining operations, Nahalze deserves to know. And the Apache know this territory better than anyone. They might have information about what happened to those women." Tabitha set down her coffee cup. "Would the chief speak with us? With outsiders, he might," Hannah said, surprising them. "Especially if you approach him with respect and share what you know about the land theft. Nahalze's daughter is educated in both Apache and white ways. She sometimes serves as his interpreter with officials." "I need to return to town tonight," Zach said, his expression troubled. "The town hall records may contain proof of the forged land claims, but I need to review them before Bolton realizes what I'm looking for." "You shouldn't go alone," Tabitha protested. "Bolton's men could be waiting for you." Zach's eyes met hers, and the concern she saw there warmed something inside her. "That's why I need you safe here, Miss Lockhart. If something happens to me, you have Emily's letter and your own observations. You can get word to the territorial marshal's office in Tucson." "I'll ride with you," Daniel offered. 2 guns are better than 1 when dealing with Bolton's crew." As the men discussed their plans for the evening, Hannah drew Tabitha aside. "Come with me, dear. Let me show you around while those 2 plot their heroics." Hannah led her through the comfortable ranch house and out to a kitchen garden lush with vegetables and herbs. Daniel and Zach served together in the war, she explained, bending to pick some mint leaves. Zach saved my husband's life at Gettysburg. That's a bond that doesn't break. How long have you known Marshal Granger? Tabitha asked, accepting the sprig of mint Hannah offered. Since '68, when he helped us establish this ranch. He was already a deputy marshal then, chasing justice across the territories. Hannah gave her a knowing look. He's a good man, educated, honorable, and kinder than his profession sometimes allows him to show. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. I've known him less than a day. Sometimes a day is all it takes to recognize something special. Hannah smiled gently. I saw how he looks at you like a man who's found water after crossing a desert. He admires my poetry, Tabitha demurred, though her heart quickened at Hannah's words. He admires more than your poetry, I'd wager. Hannah led her toward a small hillock overlooking the ranch. Zach's been alone a long time. His work doesn't allow for much permanence. My work has been my focus as well, Tabitha said softly. Teaching and writing leave little room for other considerations. They paused at the top of the rise, the panorama of rugged mountains and valleys spread before them. Hannah touched Tabitha's arm gently. Look around you, Tabitha. The West is harsh and beautiful, dangerous and full of possibility just like love. Don't let fear keep you from either. Before Tabitha could respond, a shout came from the direction of the ranch house. Daniel was waving to them, pointing toward the road where a cloud of dust indicated approaching riders. That's not Blackstone's men, Hannah said, her brow furrowing. They wouldn't approach openly like that. They hurried back to the house, where Zach and Daniel were already mounted and watching the approaching party. As they drew closer, Tabitha could make out 6 riders, Apache warriors, their proud bearing unmistakable even at a distance. That's Chief Nahilze himself, Daniel said with surprise. Something serious must have happened to bring him here with his warriors. The Apache riders halted a respectful distance from the house. Their leader, a dignified man with silver streaking his black hair, raised his hand in greeting. Beside him rode a younger woman wearing a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and elements of frontier dress. Daniel rode forward to meet them, exchanging words Tabitha couldn't hear. After a brief conversation, he returned to the yard where Zach waited. Nahilze says his scouts found something we need to see, Daniel reported, his expression grim. A burial site on the disputed land, fresh graves. Zach's hand moved to his holster instinctively. The missing women, he doesn't know. But his daughter Nasha, Daniel nodded toward the young woman with the chief, says white men have been seen digging at night near the contested boundary. Tabitha stepped forward. I should come with you. If it's Emily and the others, I can identify them. Zach's jaw tightened. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here alone if Bolton's men come looking, she countered. Besides, I knew Emily slightly, and if these graves are connected to what was in my poetry, I should bear witness. Hannah laid a hand on Zach's arm. She's right, Zach. And Nasha would welcome another woman's presence. The Apache respect those who honor their dead. After a moment of internal struggle visible on his face, Zach nodded. Stay close to me at all times, and we'll need to move quickly, we're losing daylight. Daniel helped Tabitha mount her mare again, murmuring encouragement as she winced from her still tender injuries. Zach rode alongside her as they approached the Apache party, his presence solid and reassuring. Chief Nahilze studied Tabitha with keen dark eyes as Daniel made introductions. The chief's daughter Nasha translated her father's words into fluent English. My father welcomes the woman who speaks truth with her writing spirit, Nasha said. He has heard of your courage from the Morgan woman. Tabitha inclined her head respectfully. I am honored by your welcome, Chief Nahilze. I seek only truth and justice for women who may have been silenced. After Nasha translated, a flicker of approval crossed the chief's weathered face. He spoke again, his deep voice resonant with authority. My father says the land where the fresh graves lie is sacred to our people, Nasha explained. It was protected in the treaty signed by his father, but the mining company has been encroaching for months. When our warriors protested, the sheriff threatened war. Zach leaned forward in his saddle. Please tell your father that as a federal marshal, I uphold the treaties made by the United States government. If Judge Blackstone has violated Apache territory, he will answer for it." As they spoke, Tabitha found herself studying Nasha. The young woman carried herself with quiet dignity, her intelligence evident in her thoughtful translations and the assessing glances she cast toward Zach and Tabitha. When the introductions and preliminary discussions concluded, Chief Nahilze signaled for the party to move out. They rode single file along a narrow trail leading into the foothills, following a route that would keep them hidden from any observers in Copper Creek. The journey took nearly 2 hours, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. Despite her physical discomfort, Tabitha found herself entranced by the stark beauty of the landscape, the red-hued cliffs, the unexpected patches of greenery clustered around hidden springs, the vast open sky that seemed to embrace the earth. Nasha dropped back to ride beside her at one point, studying Tabitha's bruised face. "The marks of the white man's fear," she observed quietly. "My father says only weak men beat women for their words." "Your English is excellent," Tabitha replied, impressed. "I attended the mission school for 3 years. I learned your language to protect my people from more broken promises." Nasha's direct gaze was challenging yet not unfriendly. "The Marshal, he is different from other white lawmen. He looks at you with respect." Tabitha glanced ahead where Zach rode with Chief Nahilze and Daniel, deep in conversation. "Marshal Granger believes in justice for all people, regardless of gender or heritage. That makes him unusual in these parts." "And you, what do you believe in, Tabitha Lockhart?" "I believe in the power of words to reveal truth and create change," Tabitha answered honestly. "I believe women's voices matter, just as I believe your people's rights to their sacred lands matter." Nasha nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you are the right one to tell this story." She pointed ahead to where the trail crested a ridge. "We are almost there. Prepare your heart for what you will see." The burial site lay in a small valley sheltered by towering rock formations. The ground had been disturbed in 3 distinct places, the earth mounded and marked with crude wooden crosses. No names were carved on these markers, only dates spanning the past year. Zach dismounted first, helping Tabitha down from her horse. The Apache warriors formed a respectful perimeter as Chief Nahilze spoke in low tones to his daughter. "My father says his hunters discovered this place 4 days ago," Nasha translated. "They did not disturb the graves but kept watch. Last night, white men came with shovels, digging in other places as if searching for something." Zach surveyed the site with a lawman's careful eye. "These graves were dug in haste, but not carelessly. Someone wanted these bodies hidden but treated with some dignity." "Not Bolton's work, then," Daniel suggested. "He wouldn't bother with crosses." Tabitha moved closer to the graves, a deep sadness settling over her. "The dates match the disappearances of Emily, Sarah, and Rebecca. I think we've found them. We can't be certain without." Zach's voice trailed off, reluctant to suggest disturbing the dead. Chief Nahilze spoke again, and Nasha translated. "My father says there is no need to disturb their rest. His hunters found this nearby." She handed Zach a tarnished silver locket. Tabitha gasped softly. That was Emily's. She wore it every day. It contained a portrait of her mother. Zach opened the locket carefully, revealing a tiny faded photograph of a woman in 1850s dress. "This is evidence of murder, but we still don't know who killed them or why." "I think I do," Tabitha said quietly, the pieces falling into place in her mind. "Emily discovered the land fraud. What if Sarah and Rebecca had found other evidence against Blackstone? What if they were silenced not just for what they knew, but for what they might tell others?" Chief Nahilze spoke at length, his expression grave. "My father says his scouts have seen the judge's men searching these hills with mining equipment," Nasha translated. "They seek the silver vein that runs through our sacred grounds." Perhaps these women discovered that the richest silver lies not in the existing mine, but here on Apache land. "Greed and murder," Zach said grimly, "a story as old as time. But who buried them with crosses?" Daniel wondered. "Not Bolton, surely." "Someone with a conscience," Tabitha suggested. "Someone who couldn't save them but wouldn't leave them unburied." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Zach pulled Tabitha aside. We need to leave soon. It's not safe to be out after dark, especially with what we now know. What's our next step? She asked, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Daniel and I will ride to Tucson tomorrow for reinforcements. With evidence of murder on federal land, I can bring in a larger marshal's force. His eyes held hers intently. You should stay at the ranch with Hannah. You'll be safer there. Tabitha shook her head. Emily deserves justice, they all do. My poetry brought this to light and I need to see it through. Tabitha. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his voice made her heart quicken. These men have already killed 3 women. I can't risk losing you too. You won't lose me, she promised softly. But I won't hide while others fight for justice, my words helped uncover. Before Zach could respond, a sharp whistle came from one of the Apache scouts positioned on the ridge. Chief Nahilze called out an order, and immediately his warriors mounted their horses. Riders coming, Daniel explained tersely. At least 8 men moving fast from the direction of town. Bolton, Zach muttered. Someone must have seen us leave with the Apache. Chief Nahilze spoke urgently to Nasha, who turned to Zach. My father offers sanctuary in our village. Bolton's men will not follow into Apache territory. Zach hesitated only briefly. We accept with gratitude. Lead the way. As they mounted quickly, Tabitha saw Zach check his weapons. The grim set of his jaw told her more than words could have they were riding into danger, and the outcome was far from certain. The Apache village nestled in a hidden valley protected by natural rock formations, and accessible only by narrow passes easily defended. As they rode in under cover of darkness, Tabitha saw dozens of wickiups arranged in a circular pattern around a central clearing. Cooking fires glowed warmly, and curious faces appeared to watch the unusual procession of visitors. Chief Nahilze led them to a larger wickiup set slightly apart from the others. Nasha explained that it was the village council house, used for meetings with important visitors. Inside, woven mats covered the floor, and a small fire provided warmth and light. You will be safe here tonight, Nasha assured them as women brought in blankets and food. Our warriors guard the passes. If Bolton's men approach, they will be seen long before they reach the village. While they ate a simple meal of corn cakes and dried venison, Zach and Daniel conferred with the chief through Nasha's translations. Tabitha sat slightly apart, recording the day's events in her journal by firelight, finding solace in the familiar act of putting words to paper. Later, as Daniel and the chief continued their discussion, Zach came to sit beside her, his tall frame folding gracefully onto the mat next to hers. Are you all right? He asked quietly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I'm managing. She closed her journal. It's strange I came west seeking adventure and independence, but I never imagined finding myself in an Apache village, involved in uncovering a murder conspiracy. A faint smile touched his lips. Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for it. No, she agreed softly. Sometimes it's more difficult, but also more meaningful than we could have predicted. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the village creating a peaceful backdrop. May I ask you something, Marshal Granger? Zach, he corrected gently. After everything we've been through today, I think we can dispense with formalities. Zach then. His name felt right on her lips. Yesterday, when you found me, you said something about my words being like a song you'd been waiting to hear. What did you mean by that? He looked into the fire, gathering his thoughts. For years, I've been chasing justice across the territories, seeing the worst of what people do to one another. Sometimes I wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. His gaze returned to her face. Then I read your poetry, your clear-eyed truth about women's struggles and hopes in this harsh land, and I recognized something I'd been missing. A voice speaking beauty and truth amid the chaos. Tabitha felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Most men find my writing too forthright, too challenging. Most men fear what they don't understand, Zach replied. I've spent my life trying to understand, to see beyond the surface of things. His hand moved closer to hers on the mat, not quite touching. Your words don't frighten me, Tabitha. They remind me why this work matters. Before she could respond, Daniel approached from across the wickiup. Nahilze's scouts have returned. Bolton's men searched the burial site but withdrew toward town afterward. They didn't follow our trail to the Apache lands. That buys us time, Zach said, standing. We should leave at first light for Tucson. With federal reinforcements, we can arrest Bolton and Blackstone before they destroy more evidence or lives. My father offers warriors to escort you safely past Copper Creek, Nasha added, joining their conversation. He also asks that the woman who writes truth stay with us while the men go to Tucson. That would be safer, Zach agreed, looking at Tabitha, but Tabitha shook her head firmly. I appreciate the chief's offer, but my place is with you. I can identify Emily's belongings and testify about her letter. Besides, Tucson has a newspaper. This story deserves to be told broadly, not just in a courtroom. Nasha smiled slightly after translating for her father. He says you have the spirit of an Apache woman, stubborn and brave. Tell him I consider that the highest compliment, Tabitha replied. As they prepared to sleep, the village settling into nighttime quiet around them, Tabitha found herself wondering about the path that had led her here from Boston society to an Apache village, from teaching grammar to uncovering murder. And throughout it all, the surprising presence of Zach Granger, a lawman who valued her words when others had tried to silence them. Morning came with pearl gray light filtering through the Wikiup's smoke hole. Tabitha woke to find Nasha beside her, offering a cup of fragrant tea. The men prepare the horses, Nasha said quietly. But before you leave, my grandmother wishes to speak with you. She is our tribe's storyteller. Curious, Tabitha followed Nasha to a smaller Wikiup where an elderly woman sat wrapped in a beautifully woven blanket. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes bright with intelligence despite her advanced years. Nasha introduced her as Grandmother Ista, explaining that the old woman had requested this meeting after hearing about Tabitha's poetry. Grandmother says that in our tradition, those who keep stories are sacred, Nasha translated as the old woman spoke in Apache. They carry the truth of a people through dark times, preserving what would otherwise be lost. Tabitha listened respectfully as Grandmother Ista continued, her gnarled hands moving expressively as she spoke. She says you must carry the story of the 3 women in the earth, but also the story of our people's land being stolen. Both truths are connected, both must be remembered. Nasha's voice softened, and she says the man who values your words has a good spirit. Such men are rare in any tribe. Before they left, Grandmother Ista pressed something into Tabitha's hand, a small pouch containing what appeared to be herbs and a tiny carved stone bird. For protection on your journey, Nasha explained. The bird represents voice and freedom, things my grandmother says you already carry within you. Touched by the unexpected gift, Tabitha carefully tucked it into her pocket as they rejoined the others preparing to depart. The ride to Tucson would take most of the day, following trails that avoided Copper Creek and the main roads where Bolton might have men watching. Chief Nahilze provided 4 warriors as escorts for the first part of the journey until they reached safer territory. As they set out, Tabitha found herself riding beside Zach, the morning sun casting long shadows ahead of them. Her body still ached from the beating, but a new determination filled her. These women, Emily, Sarah, Rebecca, deserved to have their stories told. And Tabitha was increasingly certain that her own story was becoming intertwined with the tall marshal who rode beside her, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for danger. Something on your mind? Zach asked, noticing her thoughtful gaze. I was thinking about paths, she replied. How we rarely see where they're leading until we're already traveling them. He nodded, understanding in his expression. The best journeys are those we couldn't have planned. They shape us in ways we never expected. Like a Boston schoolteacher finding her voice in the Arizona territory. Or a Pennsylvania farm boy becoming a marshal who quotes poetry. His smile reached his eyes, warming them. Life has a strange way of bringing the right people together at the right time, the right people. The words echoed in Tabitha's mind as they rode, bringing with them a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Their journey to Tucson proceeded without incident, thanks to the Apache escorts and Zach's careful route planning. They reached the territorial capital by late afternoon, the substantial adobe buildings and bustling streets a stark contrast to Copper Creek's frontier rawness. Zach led them directly to the federal marshal's office, a solidly constructed building near the courthouse. Inside, they found Marshal James Hollister, a grizzled veteran lawman whom Zach clearly respected. "Granger, didn't expect to see you back so soon." Hollister's bushy eyebrows rose at the sight of Tabitha and Daniel. "Brought company, I see." "We've uncovered a murder conspiracy in Copper Creek," Zach explained, removing his hat. "Judge Blackstone and Sheriff Bolton are implicated in the deaths of 3 women and land fraud involving Apache territory." Hollister's weathered face grew serious as Zach outlined their discoveries, presenting Emily's letter and the locket as evidence. When Tabitha described the beating she'd received and the grave site they'd found, the senior marshal's expression darkened further. "Blackstone has friends in high places," Hollister warned, "but murder and treaty violations will override even his connections." He turned to a deputy. "Gather 6 men, best riders with steady nerves. We ride for Copper Creek at dawn." "We should also speak with the newspaper," Tabitha suggested. "Public exposure might protect us from interference by Blackstone's political allies." Hollister studied her thoughtfully. "The lady has a point, Granger. Edward Bynes at the Arizona Citizen is no friend of corruption. He might be interested in this story." While Daniel secured rooms for them at a nearby hotel, Zach and Tabitha visited the newspaper office. Edward Bynes proved to be a sharp-eyed man with ink-stained fingers and an insatiable curiosity. He listened intently to their account, taking detailed notes. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs telling," Bynes declared when they finished. "Corruption, murder, the exploitation of Apache lands, it has every element of the injustice that plagues our territories. We need to be careful not to jeopardize the legal case," Zach cautioned. "Of course, Marshal, but I can publish an initial report about the investigation without specific details." Bynes turned to Tabitha. "Miss Lockhart, would you consider writing a companion piece, something about your experiences in Copper Creek and what drove these women to speak out?" Tabitha glanced at Zach, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored, Mr. Bynes. These women deserve to have their courage remembered." They spent another hour at the newspaper office, with Tabitha drafting her article while Bynes prepared his news report. When they finally left, the sun was setting over Tucson's adobe buildings, painting them in shades of gold and amber. "You're a natural writer," Zach commented as they walked toward the hotel. Bynes was impressed with how quickly you composed that piece. "Words have always come easily to me," Tabitha admitted. "It's having people listen to them that's proven more difficult. People will listen now." Zach stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden evening light. "Tabitha, I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow in Copper Creek, your courage in this matter has been remarkable." "I've only done what was necessary for justice," she said softly. "No, you've done far more." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When I found you beaten and still defiant, still believing in the power of your words, despite everything, it reminded me why I became a marshal in the first place, to protect those brave enough to stand for truth." They stood close now, the bustle of Tucson's evening activities seeming distant compared to the immediate connection between them. Tabitha was acutely aware of his presence, of the way his gaze moved from her eyes to her lips. "Zach," she said softly, "when this is over, Miss Lockhart." "Marshal Granger," Daniel's voice broke the moment as he hurried toward them. "Marshal Hollister has received a telegram from Copper Creek. Bolton and Blackstone are attempting to leave the territory. They've booked passage on tomorrow's eastbound train." Zach's expression shifted immediately to the focused intensity of a lawman. "Then we move tonight, not tomorrow. We can intercept them before they reach the station." He turned to Tabitha, regret in his eyes. "You should remain here in Tucson where it's safe." "No," she said firmly. "I've come this far. I won't stay behind now. Tabitha, these men have already killed 3 women. If something happened to you, then my words would remain," she interrupted gently. "But I refuse to let fear silence me when we're so close to justice." She touched his arm lightly. "Besides, Emily's letter is in my handwriting now. You may need me to verify its authenticity." After a moment of internal struggle visible on his face, Zach nodded. "Stay close to me at all times, and if there's trouble, I'll be careful," she promised. "But I'm seeing this through to the end." Their eyes held for a moment longer, unspoken feelings passing between them before Daniel cleared his throat. "Hollister's gathering the men now," he reminded them. "We should hurry." Within the hour, they were riding north with Marshal Hollister and 6 deputies, the night sky brilliant with stars above them. Despite the danger ahead, Tabitha felt a sense of purpose and clarity she'd never experienced before. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with courage and with Zach Granger at her side. They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared on the rough terrain. By dawn, they had reached the outskirts of Copper Creek, approaching from the hills rather than the main road. Hollister sent scouts ahead who reported that unusual activity centered around Judge Blackstone's mansion on the edge of town. "Looks like they're loading wagons," the deputy reported. "At least 6 armed men guarding the house, and Bolton's there too." Hollister gathered the group behind a rocky outcrop overlooking the town. "They'll likely head for the Silver Springs station. That's the nearest rail stop with eastbound service." He turned to Zach. "Granger, you know this terrain best. What's our play?" Zach studied the landscape thoughtfully. "There's a narrow pass about 3 miles east of here. The road to Silver Springs runs through it. We can set up an ambush there, catch them where they can't scatter." "And if they take hostages?" Daniel asked, voicing the concern that had been nagging at Tabitha. "Bolton's not that kind of criminal," Zach replied. "He's a bully and a murderer, but he presents himself as a lawman. Taking hostages would destroy that pretense." Hollister nodded in agreement. "We'll split into 2 groups. I'll take 4 men to the pass. Granger, you and Morgan take the others and circle behind in case they change routes." "What about Miss Lockhart?" one of the deputies asked. "I'll stay with Marshal Granger's group," Tabitha said before anyone could suggest leaving her behind. "I've come this far for justice." "I intend to see it done." Though Hollister looked skeptical, Zach nodded. "She stays with me. Her testimony will be crucial when we bring Blackstone and Bolton to trial." They separated according to plan, with Hollister's group heading directly for the pass, while Zach led Tabitha, Daniel, and 2 deputies on a circuitous route that would position them behind Blackstone's likely escape path. As they rode, Tabitha found herself studying the rugged landscape in the golden morning light. This harsh, beautiful country had claimed the lives of 3 brave women, yet it had also brought her to Zach Granger, a man who valued her words when others had tried to silence them. "You're quiet," Zach observed as they paused to rest the horses briefly. "I'm thinking about Emily and the others," she admitted. "How they died for speaking truth to power, and about how easily I might have shared their fate if you hadn't come along when you did." His expression softened. "You're stronger than you know, Tabitha. Even beaten and broken, your spirit remained undefeated. That kind of courage is rare." Before she could respond, one of the deputies signaled from his lookout position. "Riders coming from town, at least 8 men with wagons." They quickly mounted and moved into position, hidden among the rocks overlooking the trail. Through field glasses, Zach identified Judge Blackstone riding in a covered wagon with Sheriff Bolton and several armed men surrounding it. "They're heavily armed," Zach murmured. "This won't be an easy capture." Tabitha watched as the procession approached the narrow pass where Hollister and his men waited. Her heart pounded in her chest, anticipation and fear mingling as the moment of confrontation drew near. The ambush unfolded with precision. Hollister's men blocked the pass with fallen logs, forcing Blackstone's convoy to halt. The marshal's voice rang out, demanding surrender in the name of federal law. For a moment, it seemed the judge might comply. Then gunfire erupted from Bolton's men, the sharp reports echoing across the rocky landscape. "They're fighting," Daniel said grimly. "Time to close the trap." Zach turned to Tabitha. "Stay here with Deputy Wilson. Don't expose yourself unless absolutely necessary." She nodded, accepting the necessity of caution even as she longed to witness justice being served. Zach, Daniel, and the other deputy mounted quickly and rode down toward the pass, coming up behind Blackstone's men who were now pinned between the 2 martial forces. The gunfight was brief but intense. From her position, Tabitha could see men falling on both sides, though the marshal's superior position gave them a decisive advantage. Within minutes, several of Bolton's deputies had thrown down their weapons in surrender. Then she saw Sheriff Bolton break away from the main group, spurring his horse up a side trail that would bypass their position. He was heading directly toward where she and Deputy Wilson waited. "He's coming this way," Wilson warned, drawing his pistol. "Stay behind me, Miss Lockhart." But as Bolton crested the rise, he spotted them immediately. With a snarl of recognition, he fired at Wilson, hitting the young deputy in the shoulder and sending him tumbling behind a boulder. Tabitha found herself exposed, facing the man who had ordered her beaten for daring to speak her mind. Bolton's face contorted with rage as he recognized her. "You," he spat, raising his pistol again. "Should have finished you when I had the chance." In that moment, Tabitha felt no fear, only a calm certainty. "You silenced Emily and the others, but you won't silence me, Bolton. Their story will be told." Bolton's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, another shot rang out. The sheriff jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he toppled from his horse. Zach stood 50 yards away, his smoking pistol still raised. His eyes met Tabitha's across the distance, relief evident in his expression as he saw she was unharmed. By midday, the confrontation was over. Judge Blackstone and his surviving men were in custody. Bolton was dead, and the marshals were sorting through documents found in the judge's wagon, evidence of land fraud that extended far beyond Copper Creek. Tabitha tended to Deputy Wilson's wound, while Zach and Hollister questioned the prisoners. When she finally had a moment alone with Zach, she found him standing on a ridge overlooking the area where they'd found the 3 graves. "It's over," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "This part is," he agreed. "The trials will take time, and there may be others involved in Blackstone's schemes that we haven't identified yet. But Emily and the others will have justice. Their stories won't be forgotten." She touched the small pouch grandmother Ista had given her, still in her pocket. "The truth has a way of emerging, even when powerful men try to bury it." Zach turned to face her, the afternoon sun highlighting the strong planes of his face. "What will you do now, Tabitha? Return to teaching in Copper Creek?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. Mr. Bynes offered me a position at the Arizona Citizen writing about women's experiences in the territories, educational issues, and Apache relations. I think I can do more good with my words there than in a classroom." A smile touched his lips. "You'd be excellent at that. Your writing has power. I felt it the first time I read your poetry. And you, Marshal Granger, will you continue chasing justice across the territories? That's been my life for many years," he acknowledged. "But lately, I've been thinking there might be more to living than just the next case, the next town." They stood close now, the vast Arizona sky stretching endlessly above them. Tabitha felt her heart quicken as Zach reached out to take her hand. "Your words are like a song I've been waiting to hear all my life, Tabitha Lockhart," he said softly. "Clear and true and brave. I don't want to stop listening." "Then don't," she whispered, her free hand reaching up to touch his face. "Some songs are meant to be heard for a lifetime." When his lips met hers, gentle yet certain, Tabitha felt as though the poetry she'd always written had finally found its perfect audience. In this harsh, beautiful land where she'd nearly lost her voice forever, she'd instead found the one man who truly heard her. The return to Tucson was triumphant. Edward Bynes published Tabitha's account of the Copper Creek conspiracy alongside the news of Blackstone's arrest, creating a sensation throughout the territory. The story was picked up by newspapers as far away as San Francisco and Chicago, bringing national attention to the corruption that had plagued the Arizona territory. More importantly, the bodies of Emily, Sarah, and Rebecca were properly exhumed and given dignified burials in Tucson's cemetery, with Tabitha writing moving eulogies that celebrated their courage and contributions. Their families, notified by telegraph, sent grateful letters thanking Tabitha for ensuring their daughters' deaths had not been in vain. In the weeks that followed, Tabitha found her place at the Arizona Citizen, her articles on women's issues and territorial politics drawing an enthusiastic readership. She developed a particular focus on relations between settlers and the Apache, often consulting with Nasha, who became both a source and a friend. Zach remained in Tucson during Blackstone's trial, taking temporary assignment at the marshal's office there. He and Tabitha spent their evenings together, sometimes reading poetry aloud on her small porch, sometimes simply talking about their hopes for the territory's future. On a warm evening 6 months after they'd first met, Zach invited Tabitha for a ride outside town. They stopped at a beautiful overlook where the setting sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been offered a permanent position in Tucson," Zach told her as they spread a blanket for a simple picnic. "Marshal Hollister is retiring, and he's recommended me as his replacement." "That's wonderful news," Tabitha said warmly. "You've certainly earned it." "It would mean no more constant traveling," he continued, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident manner. "A real home for the first time in years." "Tucson has become home to me as well," she admitted. "My writing has found purpose here, and I've never felt more fulfilled professionally." Zach took her hands in his expression serious yet tender. "Tabitha, when I found you that night in Copper Creek, beaten for daring to speak your truth, something changed in me. I'd been enforcing the law for years, but you reminded me why justice matters not just as an abstract concept, but for real people with real voices." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Your words have been my song these past months, guiding me, inspiring me, challenging me to be better than I was. I can't imagine my life without that song now." Opening the box revealed a simple but elegant ring, a small diamond catching the last rays of sunset. "Tabitha Lockhart, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of sharing your words and your life with me for all our days to come?" Tears of joy filled Tabitha's eyes as she looked from the ring to his hopeful face. "Yes, Zach Granger, 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added softly, "My words found their perfect audience in you, the one person who heard them as they were meant to be heard." Their wedding took place the following spring in Tucson's small church, with guests including Daniel and Hannah Morgan, Nasha and her father, Edward Bynes, and Marshal Hollister. Tabitha wore a gown of ivory silk with Emily's recovered locket around her neck, in tribute to the women whose fate had brought her and Zach together. In her vows, she included lines of poetry she'd written especially for the occasion. "In a land where silence was demanded, you heard my whispered truth. In a place where women's words were feared, you called them songs of beauty." Zach's answering vows were equally moving. "I promise to listen always to your words, to cherish your voice as the greatest gift in my life, and to stand beside you as you speak your truth to a world that needs to hear it." Their life together unfolded with the same passion and purpose that had marked their beginning. Tabitha's writing career flourished, her articles and eventually her books bringing attention to women's experiences on the frontier. Zach served with distinction as Tucson's chief marshal, instituting reforms that emphasized justice over mere law enforcement. They made their home in a comfortable adobe house on Tucson's outskirts, with a study for Tabitha's writing and a wide porch where they often sat in the evenings, reading to each other or simply watching the desert sunset. 2 years after their marriage, they welcomed a daughter they named Emily, followed 2 years later by a son they called Daniel. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised Tabitha with a bound collection of her poetry, privately published and titled Her Words, My Song. Inside the cover, he had written, "To my beloved Tabitha, whose courage and voice have transformed not just my life, but countless others. What began with finding you beaten for speaking has become the greatest blessing I could have imagined. Your words will always be my favorite song." Tabitha's response was to lead him to her study, where she revealed her latest project, a novel based on their experiences in Copper Creek, dedicated to the memory of Emily, Sarah, and Rebecca, and to the man who had valued her words when others had tried to silence them. "Our story deserves telling," she told him as he held her close. "A story of justice, of courage, and of a love born from the simple act of truly listening." "Tell it," Zach whispered against her hair. "The world needs your voice just as I do." As night fell over Tucson, with their children sleeping peacefully and the future stretching bright before them, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a beaten poet in a dusty mining town to a respected writer and beloved wife. The path had been unexpected and at times dangerous, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Beside a man who had first heard her words as a song and who still listened with the same reverence years later. In the wild Arizona territory, where women's voices were too often silenced, Tabitha Lockhart Granger had found not just her voice, but also the perfect audience. And in the harmony of their shared life, both their songs grew stronger, echoing across the desert, and into the future they were building together word by word, day by day, heart to heart.